Chapter 3. The Hunt, Part 2. Kerne's caves had been carved by water long ago. The first chamber was naturally rounded in every direction, formed by an ancient subterranean whirlpool fed by the confluence of waters coming down from the 3 passageways. Kerne led them to the smallest. Leusios saw the half-orc run his fingers over a feature on the rim of the tunnel mouth and breathe a brief prayer of thanks for a safe homecoming. When they trooped in after him, Leusios paused to look. There was a simple carving of a woman in the stone, holding a tree branch bearing fruit and a spear across her chest. Elayna, the good spirit. Kerne blocked the candle from sight as he knelt by a natural fireplace, casting a halo around his silhouette. There was a snap and crackle of dry grass catching. Light swelled around the half-orc, making his shadow swell and then shrink back. Kerne's fireplace was at the base of a natural shaft from whence a stream had once tumbled into the chamber. Now it drew Kerne's smoke upwards like a chimney. The old Fire Inn and Culane's stone house were the only buildings in Blackstone to have a chimney, both built by Durians. Leusios had heard such things existed in the monastery, too. Which of intelligence, education, or luck had been behind Kerne's choice of fireplace? The richer firelight showed him that there were 4 side caves. One Kerne had not furnished, as it still trickled with water. The other 3 were strewn with hides. "Wonderful!" exclaimed Jorwin, his bardic tenor filling the space. The bard went to appreciate a natural rock shelf filled with a multitude of figurines whittled from wood. There were animals, birds, people, and, in particular, the depiction of Elayna. "May I?" the bard asked. Kerne nodded, so Jorwin picked up a wooden figurine to appreciate its exquisite detail. Vibnia headed for a bed made from a pile of furs in one of the side chambers and sat down on it with a heavy sigh. Leusios followed and sat down next to her. He pulled his leather shoes off and unwound the cloth wraps from his feet. He massaged the flesh of his soles and allowed himself a groan of pleasure. "Never expected Kerne to be the house-proud type, eh, Vibnia?"
"The decoration is interesting."
She was rotating a carving in her long fingers. It was one of the mini Elaynas, the fruit on her branch expertly picked out, and her spear was arrow-straight. Leusios could not resist needling the priest. "You surely don't have a problem with any allegiance to the good spirit?" He wanted to see how the woman reacted.
"Certainly not."
Vibnia's voice remained smooth and remote.
"The Corpus Virgilius see the devotees of Elayna as an ally in our cause, even if at times they are unrealistic, just as we also acknowledge the Empire's reverence for Inaxos, the spirit of law, and his celestial bureaucracy as a foundation of the state. However, ours is not an unthinking faith like theirs, but a rational desire to protect and promote humanity against the evil that exists in the world."
Leusios refuted the interference of any divine hand in his life, but he was in the mood to chat. "Is it true that all the spirits have temples in Duria?"
"Yes, except Morsos, Murka to Yukits, though there are rumors of underground cults."
"So, Oriki does?" The cleric made a dry coughing deep in her throat. It took Leusios a moment to realize that the woman had chuckled.
"It would be contrary for a free spirit to have temples," she said. "City dwellers may view devotees as a cult of chaos, yet away from the civilization. Oreki is freedom personified."
She spread her long fingers as if scattering grain across the floor.
"They have holy mountains and sacred glades throughout the Empire."
Leusios heard a clatter as Kerne hung an old bronze pot over his hearth. His stomach rumbled. "Well, thank the spirits! Kerne's going to feed us." Kerne was an exceptional host. While Blackstone survived on meager rations, the half-orc had a plentiful stock of smoked rabbit, venison, and roots. He served them a stew cooked on the fire in the main cave. Leusios helped Kerne clear up, while the others settled down to sleep in the side caves. The question nagging him bypassed any polite restraint and popped out.
"How do you do it, Kerne? How can you be so self-assured when the village folk despise you?"
The half-orc was not at all upset by the question. In contrast, he grinned, showing his subtle, curved canines in the dying glow of the embers. "Because I have faith, Lucius. One day you will find that you need no acknowledgement from other people because you are confident in the presence and will of the divine." That was exactly the self-righteous answer Leusios would have expected from a priest, not a half-orc outcast. Leusios found himself intrigued rather than annoyed.
"Why are you helping us hunt for this creature, Kerne? What's in it for you?"
Now the half-orc actually laughed. "Perhaps I do it because I think it's the right thing to do."
"You might die."
"So might you. Why are you on this hunt?"
"Because I need so many answers."
That was honest, but too revealing to share. Leusios needed a convincing lie that would also earn the half-orc's respect. He built it on a kernel of truth.
"I don't think I would ever give my life for anyone," he admitted. "I know that we need to kill this thing, or more people will die. Maybe me. With your prowess in battle, I feel it's not such a risk after all."
Kerne accepted the compliment with a grin. "So, you have faith in me, and I have faith in Elayna. Thank you. Sleep well." Leusios pondered the very concept that he could have faith in anything as the half-orc pulled together the remaining hides and furs and settled down. Look at him. A half-breed with talent, yet so little ambition. Was Kerne truly content to hole himself up in this cave, trusting in the good spirit's plan until his life was utterly wasted? Leusios pulled his blanket over himself and shifted restlessly. Neither Inaxos nor Elayna had held back his father's fist or tamed his stepmother's tongue. If the divine had a plan, then Leusios, the miller's son, had no interest in it. "But what if you die tomorrow?" he asked himself as Kulain's words came back to him.
"For tomorrow, we have the fight of our lives." "You can stay as long as you like."
Elayna glanced up at her father. He was looking old. His golden-brown beard was becoming shot with silver. Hal was stirring the stew in his old camp pot over the central hearth. It may have been black with soot from every frontier of the empire and dented from 100 long marches, but it always made the food taste better. The fire cast light and shadow across the remnants of his campaigning days, his armor, his weapons, even his praectary pennant. Even full of his possessions, it felt empty. It was more home than any other place he had been, and yet she no longer belonged here. "Thank you, but I need to tend the farm," she said.
"Not while the beast is at large," he huffed.
He avoided the obvious. Her home was a charred and rotting ruin. She sighed. He meant well. "I'll stay until the hunting party comes back." He raised a bushy eyebrow.
"Which one?"
That confused her. "Me, Kriggs?"
"Sorry I didn't tell you. Kulain led out a party of his own. I saw them head out just after dawn."
"Kulain?" The big man in black always unnerved her. "Who went with him?" He put the lid back on the pot.
"The same group who—"
It was rare for him to falter in speech, except when he approached an emotional matter. Then he would draw breath and then close his mouth firmly. He did that now, but she knew him too well. So Lucius and the others had gone with Kulain, the same group who had been too slow to save Niall and Toothley. "I don't blame them," she said softly, touching his arm. "I would have been dead if not for Leusios." He gave her a long look.
"I should have gone with them."
"You promised to protect this village."
"What use is that when I can't protect my own daughter?"
She didn't have an answer for that. She was tired and drained by grief.
"I thought something was going to happen,"
she admitted in a whisper.
"What?"
He looked at her, brow furrowing.
"Nothing."
She waved him off.
"I didn't raise you to say nothing,"
he said firmly.
"What do you mean?"
"It's silly."
He got up from his stool by the hearth and went to sit by her. She had been sewing a patch on his jerkin. His big hands gathered her own between his rough palms.
"You're smarter than me and every other soul in this place."
He cocked his head to one side.
"Except Murgathwin. She's a clever old bird."
He focused back on her.
"Tell me."
"I dreamt it, Father, but I told myself to ignore it, that it was just foolish nerves, that nothing," her voice cracked, "nothing would happen."
He was silent for a while, then he finally spoke.
"And you blame yourself?"
She nodded, unable to speak. He took her chin gently between thumb and forefinger.
"The spirits may speak to us in our dreams, but if we listened to everything they told us, acted on every impulse they gave us, Elayna, we would go mad. No, it's not your fault."
He went back to the pot and lifted the lid, releasing a plume of aromas. Affecting disinterest, a ruse that he failed at completely, he asked,
"What did you dream of?"
She flinched at the memory. Normally, he would have left it at that, but he had sensed its importance to her and her need to share the horror.
"Blood, Father. I saw blood on the beanstalks and fire."
She knew there had been more, but as was the way of dreams, only feelings lingered that echoed Niall's last terrifying moments. She shuddered. He grunted, feigning greater interest in the stew. They didn't speak of it again. Kerne pondered on the past night as he led his guests back to the trail in the morning. Last night had been an experiment in having human company. Not since he'd run with the orcs had he shared a space so closely with others. He jumped down from the hanging gully and inhaled the air deeply. Clean. No one had passed this way last night. "Still up the road?" he asked Kulain as he helped the mages down. The watcher thanked him and produced the white stone from his pouch again. He placed it on the palm of his hand where it quivered as if alive. He nodded.
"Yes, it hasn't moved. Let us make haste. I would hate for it to slip away at the last moment."
The wind blew noisily through the peaks, buffeting their ears. Dozens of white clouds with gray bellies sailed overhead, and beyond them the sun shone against a pale blue sky. It was strong enough to warm an upturned cheek despite the cooler air. Kerne loved days like this in the mountains. He enjoyed feeling the gusts on his bare face and ruffling his thick mane of soft black hair. These mountains were a bare wilderness of stone with no trees and only a few bushes sheltering in the gullies and deep ravines. A few crevices even gave succor to the alpine flowers lucky enough to seed themselves there. Without much vegetation to soften them, the Guardian Peaks were alive with gusty booms and turbulent echoes, as if the mountains sang in a deep chorus. Very few things lived up here to listen to them. Kerne felt privileged to be one of them. It took them most of the morning to pick their way to a ruined watchpost that marked the entrance to the mining area. "I suggest we eat here," said Kerne.
"One last meal before we brandish cold iron against the foe."
Jorwin made a small smile, as if noting the moment for later. It had not even occurred to Kerne that they were doing anything heroic. "We are here to kill a dangerous beast. Let us concentrate on it as a task, or the tale will have a tragic ending, with no one to tell it."
"If Leusios tossing hot coals scared it off, then it can't be that tough," reasoned Vibnia. "The divine will guide our blades."
The priest looked sideways at Leusios. The lad looked away, perturbed for some reason that Kerne could not fathom. Everyone carried out the ritual check of their weapons before battle. Jorwin took the leather sheath off his spearhead, and Vibnia organized her arrows. Leusios drew his long knife and asked Kerne if he could borrow his whetstone. "Hold back," he advised the younger man as he passed it over. "Brandish a torch in your offhand, and only attack when it's distracted." He noticed Leusios suppress a flicker of irritation, but he covered it with a grin. "Thank you. I will." "We only have 2 torches," Jorwin pointed out. "One at the front and one at the back."
"No, I'll take the rear," decided Vibnia. "I need both hands to shoot anything coming from behind."
Kerne jerked his thumb to the greatsword hilt over his shoulder. "Me too, up front." The priest nodded.
"We keep them in the 2nd and 4th positions, if Leusios is carrying one."
Vibnia unwrapped a torch from its oiled cloth and tossed it to the youngest of the company.
"Then I suggest Jorwin takes the other."
"That puts me in the center," Kulain smiled. "As for light, I will be able to help there with my own means."
Finally, it was time. Kerne pulled on his helmet and led the way around the last few bends in the trail. The old gold mine had been worked out over 2 decades ago. It had several shafts that struck randomly into the mountainside from a wide area of barren rock surrounded by cliffs on all sides. Mountain meltwater had collected at the far end, making a pond that rippled with the gusting winds. Kerne drew his blade from over his shoulder and knelt with it planted before him to offer up a prayer. "True purpose is the strongest armor," he whispered. "Let mine be so."
"So many entrances."
Jorwin swept his arm across each dark tunnel.
"How about we each pick one, and the winner is the one with the beast?" "Kerne?"
Leusios asked nervously. "I avoided this place ever since I came to the mountains," Kerne admitted. "It never felt right. But now..." He sensed the air curdling and the stale draft from the mines turning sour. A dark shiver passed through his bones. That one. Second from the left. Leusios went to Kulain and offered the torch's head to him. The watcher understood without comment and touched the tar-cloth wrap.
"Flowers,"
the man muttered. With a pop, it gave life to a smoky flame.
"And for you,"
Kulain said to Kerne.
"In the confusion of battle, we might lose both torches."
"Lee." The man touched his helmet, and it pulsed with a golden aura. Kerne frowned in irritation, but didn't complain. He scented the nervous sweat that told him that battle was near, and the orc within him hungered for it. There had been enough talking, enough delay. His pulse quickened in excitement. Good luck, everyone. He raised his sword and led them into the mine. The mine passage went straight under the mountain and branched twice. Each time, Kerne felt the monster's presence grow stronger and led them unerringly deeper. No one spoke. The only sounds were the creaking of his leather armor, the scuffing of boots on rocks, and the soft rippling of the torch flames. He glanced behind them. Leusios was gripping his torch so tightly that his fingers were white and his breathing was nervous and shallow. Vibnia was at the rear, peering back into the darkness over a knocked arrow. As they went deeper, his excitement became a ferocious hunger. The orc within him was panting for violence. His nostrils flared with a sickening, spicy scent. It is near. They turned a corner. Suddenly, the mine became suffused with light. Kerne's eyes, attuned to the gloom, were dazzled. He blinked, recovering quickly, and gasped. The light had revealed burgeoning seams of gold that shone it back thricefold. This was not a few tired seams of a mine near its end. Luscious, shimmering gold swelled from cracks in the rock like honey oozing from the comb.
"Wind and weather!"
Jorwin exclaimed. "But," Leusios gasped, denying the evidence of his own eyes. Kerne felt the younger lad push past him to stare. Gold. No one spoke. In that shocked silence, the demon attacked. Vibnia shouted. A bow twanged. A roar exploded behind and above them. A multitude of legs scrambled along the tunnel roof. Jorwin yelled a warning. The sounds came as one, but Kerne's acute senses picked each one out separately. Leusios was in front of him, so the magus was in the greatest danger. He spun and pushed Elayna aside. Vibnia was ducking to avoid clawing limbs, while Jorwin thrust his spear upwards against the beast's charge. The creature was a hairless gray monstrosity. Its head was a sightless horror, just as Leusios had described, a naked, eyeless wolf with jaws full of hooked teeth. Its many legs stuck out of the muscular body in all directions, like a badly made spider. The demon charged along the roof of the tunnel, batting aside Jorwin's spear and snapping at the bard's head. Jorwin cried out, and blood ran from a gash in his scalp. Then it sprang forwards, its multitude of legs smashing the bard aside, intent on different prey. Kerne bellowed and thrust his blade at the monster's throat. Its quickness surprised him. The monster twisted around his blade and slammed him against the tunnel wall. The blow wrenched his helmet sideways and obscured his vision. Kulain's light winked out. In that moment of vulnerability, he ducked, in fear of the creature's bite, but no attack came. Instead, Leusios screamed in terror. He righted his helmet as the demon knocked Leusios' torch away. Shadows and light tumbled into tight space. Kerne had no time to look, but the vile presence raked every one of his senses. He rammed his sword up and to the side. It gashed something fleshy. Blood rained down onto him. His helmet was designed to see foes on the ground, not above him. He held back his next attack to get his bearings. The creature lunged at Leusios from the roof. The lad made a panicked slash at it with his long knife. The bard was struggling with his spear in the narrow space and blocking Vibnia, who had drawn her knife. It was chaos. There was no time for finesse. Kerne spun and put all his power into a two-handed strike. His blade spat sparks as it caught the stone roof and half-cut, half-smashed a leg off. The monster screamed and spun back towards him. Jorwin rammed his spear into one of its many hip joints. Leusios, still screaming in terror, punched upwards with his knife. The demon snarled and gathered itself to barge past Kerne and escape. Its physical form started to become soft to the eye. It was fading. "No, you don't!" He abandoned his sword and hurled himself at its neck. They collided with jarring force, knocking the air from his lungs. He locked his grip and, despite the shock and impact, kept his hold. He swung upwards with both legs, entangling its limbs with his own. His extra weight was too much. It lost its grip on the tunnel roof and dropped with a howl. Kerne bellowed in pain as its weight crushed him to the hard rock floor.
"Kill it!"
Kulain barked. In the anarchy of shadows and shouting, the others closed in on Kerne. The creature shrieked and made a wild attempt to escape. He wrestled to hold its thrashing limbs and keep it vulnerable to their blades. Jorwin's spearhead and 3 knives flashed in the mania of close combat. Every butcher's stroke showered Kerne with blood and gore until its dead weight collapsed onto his chest. "Stop! It's dead! It's dead!" He shouted himself hoarse before the others recovered their wits and stopped to stare at their bloody work.
"It's dead,"
confirmed Jorwin unnecessarily.
"Yes, you can stop now."
Kulain rumbled and indicated for Jorwin and Leusios to heave the heavy corpse off Kerne. Then he knelt for a closer look.
"Lee!"
Light flooded the tunnel. Kerne winced and looked at his arm. In their enthusiasm, one of his companions had stabbed him hard enough to pierce his leather armor. The bleeding was not too bad. He would bind it later. He pulled his helmet free to let his sweat cool to the underground air.
"What was it?"
gasped Leusios, pale in the mage light.
"I've only seen drawings in some of my more exotic books. They did not do it justice."
Kulain marveled. The magus absently cleaned and put away his own bloodied knife as he studied the monster.
So, was it some kind of demon? Leusios asked, unable to keep a tremble from his voice. His pale skin and white hair were flecked with blood.
It does not really have a name. Halnos of the Garantani called it a soul hunter. A little melodramatic, perhaps.
Kulain pulled back the leathery lip to study the hooked teeth.
Julianos of the Lutati was probably more apt in calling it a mage hound.
Because it serves mages? Kerne asked.
No, Kulain rumbled. It hunts them by the scent of their power.
It was hard to tell in the poor light, but Kerne could have sworn Leusios went a shade paler.
But it lunged at me, the lad whispered. Only because the quick-witted Kerne pulled me aside.
Kulain stood and clapped a grateful hand on his back. I would have done it for anyone, he replied uncomfortably. He was not familiar with receiving gratitude. I think it was charging at me, anyway.
Fire!
Leusios yelped and jumped back. The body was smoking, but it was not fire.
It's fading back to Sharkadai. Get back!
Kulain snapped.
Holshin!
The monstrous form erupted into a smothering cloud of acrid smoke. A blue light sprang from Kulain's hand and wrapped around the head, while the rest of the body dissolved into greasy fumes. Kerne saw that even the smatter of gore was dissolving from his armor.
What just happened?
He asked the magus.
Why do you think the existence of demons is so debated?
Kulain answered with a wry smile.
Its essence is an aberration to this world. Once slain, it has no will to remain. Sekutang.
The last word he murmured, and the blue light faded, leaving the mage hound's severed head bleeding ichor out on the tunnel floor.
What did you do?
Leusios asked, kneeling to have a closer look.
I assumed you wanted proof it was dead.
Kulain shrugged.
The head is bound here.
How did it surprise us? Asked Jorwin.
Just how it killed Fernan in the cellar and entered Elayna and the owl's home unseen,
Kulain explained.
From what my texts tell me, it must have been ethereal, hiding in the rock behind and above us, before being tempted out by a good meal.
The big man shrugged.
I suppose I should be flattered.
Kerne caught the magus's dark eyes drift towards Leusios before the big man turned back to him with a broad grin.
And, he pronounced, it would have escaped us had not warrior Kerne wrestled it to the floor. Aye, a bold move.
Jorwin agreed and clapped his injured arm.
Thanks,
Kerne said with a wince.
That leaves only one mystery,
observed Vibnia. She tapped her knife along a bulging vein of gold.
Where did this come from?
Yes, that is a little surprising,
Kulain admitted. He clapped his hands and his deep voice raised slightly in an upbeat manner.
Now, those who took the risk of coming with me can earn a greater reward than glory alone.
Kerne listened in disbelief as Kulain explained that the gold find had been made by all of them, and therefore each deserved an equal share.
I know nothing of mining,
Kerne exclaimed. He had never sought such riches.
I will enlist the aid of the merchant Trubios Swat, a trustworthy man of both Keetish and Durian parentage,
Kulain offered.
He will manage the mine on our behalf and ensure an equal portion to each of us.
I want none of this,
Jorwin muttered, and turned on his heel to walk back to the surface.
Then I will ask Trubios to hold it in trust for you until you do,
Kulain declared firmly towards the bards retreating back. He shook his head with a bemused smile and then looked back to the rest of them.
Now, we must return to break the tale of a successful hunt and Blackstone's new prosperity."
Kerne nodded mutely. He was having a terrible premonition that life was about to get complicated. Excited shouts and cheering drew Elayna and her father Hal to the market round. People were gathering where the trade road came in from the ford. Above the din, she heard the bard's voice.
"In the dark we sought it, through long abandoned tunnels, grim with the stench of evil."
As she approached, those who saw her fell silent and parted to let her and her father through.
"Wrapped in a cloak of shadow, it evaded our mortal senses, waiting for its moment to strike."
As Jorwin paused theatrically, the innermost circle of villagers opened to let Elayna through. The rest of the crowd quietened abruptly. The bard acknowledged her arrival with a grave inclination of his head, which was bandaged and showed a little dried blood. She was in no mood for tales.
"Is it dead?"
She watched him, the artist at work taking the measure of his audience and gauging how to change the pace of his story. The silence was only disturbed by the rippling sounds of the ford. Jorwin reached back to grip Kerne's shoulder. He continued in a stern whisper that reached every ear.
"It came upon us, crawling across the tunnel roof like a monstrous spider."
Then he bellowed,
"And this man plucked it from the rock and hurled it to the ground."
In a sudden lunge that made people jump, Jorwin spun around the circle, shouting his climax out.
"I heard its bones crack as he wrestled it there, fearless of tooth and claw, uncowled by evil. Mighty in arm and spirit, he grappled with the monster, bearing its belly to us."
He raised his spear.
"And we struck in time and time again, until its demonic ichor ran freely from wall to wall."
Elayna looked at Kerne and did not see the fierce warrior from the bard's tale. Instead, the half-orc looked vaguely embarrassed.
"You asked if it was dead,"
the bard said loudly, and offered her a blood-soaked sack.
"You want to know the vengeance is wrought, and that the horror is ended."
He whipped the sack away to reveal the monstrous head that had haunted her these past few nights.
"Then rejoice! The beast is slain."
The crowd exploded into an exultant roar. She stepped closer to look at the hairless, eyeless head, its slack mouth still full of the bloody teeth that had taken her husband. On impulse, she seized its snout, willing away the nightmares.
"Jorwin,"
she said.
"Aye, dear lady." "Burn it."
They built a celebratory pyre in the middle of the market round, and Gwendol brought out a cask of ale. The people brought what little food they had to share, and the impromptu celebration went well into the dark hours, lit by the great fire. The festivities was still raucous when Mikreg and his hunters returned. Jorwin unleashed his bardic wit upon them without mercy. "Where are you going?" Elayna asked Kerne as he turned to leave. The half-orc had lingered on the margins of the celebration, occasionally pulled in by Jorwin, but always drifting back to the fringe. She watched the emotions flit across his face. "I've not had the chance to thank you," she said. "No thanks are required. Not from you," he faltered. "But you have the thanks of the entire village, whether they say it or not." Standing so close to the massive warrior, she did not feel intimidated. Rather, it was he who shrank from her. "I failed you." His voice really was beautiful, even when encumbered with regret. This was not the arrogant killer that she had expected, like Mikreg or one of his kind. She had had to draw up courage enough to approach the huge half-orc, let alone speak to him, and now she felt by far the stronger of the two. She placed a hand on his arm. "Aye, you failed. You failed me, Niall and Toothly, and all those who loved them. But you tried,
and because of that, I will be forever grateful."
She squeezed his arm and turned away, finding unexpected comfort in his stunned expression. That concludes the second part of Chapter 3, The Hunt. The beast may be dead, but the gold is a revelation. Blackstone is not alone in its excitement. News of the gold travels fast and stirs the great houses of the Durian Empire into action. Amidst it all, Kerne gets a message from his dead mother. See you next week.